Welcome back. We've asked Dutch and Leiden-based composer Michiel van Poelgeest to come up with a poetic and musical approach to this conference's main objective, turning the internet into a meaningful data space. After we had explained the basics of FDOs to him, which was not an easy task, he came up with the concept you're about to listen to, inspired by Puccini's Nessun Dorma, Nobody Sleeps. He pictured thousands of scientists and researchers fueling themselves with endless amounts of coffee, working tirelessly into the night to find what exactly? This is the story of the princess who was kissed by the machine, part 1. Please give a warm welcome to Flory, Willemijn, Skip, Soraya and Tessa.
They've got questions. Wow, that was fantastic. Kissed by the machine. Dear colleagues, dear friends, welcome to Leiden. Welcome to the first international conference on fair digital objects. Almost 2 years ago, inspired by the promise of the fair digital objects and motivated by the community support, but also the amazing amount of work done already on a voluntary basis within the forum's working groups, we called for the organization of a milestone event. A conference that will bring together technical, scientific, industry, and science policy stakeholders to set a framework for a hopefully worldwide FDO implementation. It is needless probably to highlight in front of an audience like this the challenges linked to the collective ability of our societies, but also each one of us individually, to make sense of the growing body of available information. We experience these challenges daily, in science, in industry, in every single manifestation of the online social interactions. Lack of transparency and scrutiny eventually leads to the lack of trust in public assertions and confusion. It gives growth to the unpredictable social pseudo-movements and conspiracy theories. These are spanners in the works for social awareness, for true social awareness, and for an action on issues such as climate crisis or the wipeout of the planet's biological and natural resources, or even human health programs. Furthermore, the lack of trust is not restricted itself into the data. It unavoidably spills over to the very fabric of the society and gradually is reflected on our political, economic, scientific, social institutions. Our fight against misinformation and lack of transparency is not only a technological one. It is predominantly a social one. It relies on our ability of our societies, but also as a whole, but also each one of us individually as citizens, to navigate this brave new world of information plethora, to glean the useful and the trusted from the not. And this challenge is equally difficult for all, humans and machines alike, as we rely more and more on our intellectual partnerships with the artificial intelligence, for instance, to deliver impact across most societal endeavors. Our ability to programmatically assert fitness for purpose is equally important to the capacity of humans to interpret available information. Fair digital objects do not come as a technology-driven solution. We present FDOs as a transformative concept that allows humans and machines to process, interpret, and use data in context. As such, we understand FDOs as a very simple, but yet very powerful framework that would allow the preservation of, if you wish, the social aura of data. An aura that is traditionally in traditional human-to-human communication channels is preserved, but has proven to be extremely difficult to maintain in mass-scale cyber communication. How can we preserve that social aura of data in cyberspace? How can we enable a global integrated data space? How can we deliver the Internet of Fair data and services? What are the technological means of delivery of FDOs? What components do we already have, and what do we miss? These are some of the questions that we will aim to answer over the next 3 days. But this is just a start. The participation in this first conference of all of you, colleagues from more than 30 countries, shows that the time is ripe. And you might wonder why we ask these questions here, in a natural science museum. Maybe because in research and public engagement organizations, like Naturalis, for instance, and as points of interaction between science and the wider society, we experience firsthand the negative impact of the lack of trust in science and evidence-driven decision-making. Naturalis, like many other organizations, invest in scaling up our scientific and social footprint. For this, we rely more and more on mass-scale evidence. We can interconnect to describe and model life on this planet. Arguably, one of the most significant advantages of our approach on FDOs is that it has been driven by the needs of communities of practice across fields of science and industry. From the initiatives to deliver research-enabled digital twins for physical phenomena or objects, to the need for material passports. Over the next 3 days, we will have the opportunity to discover how FDOs already help in addressing real-world problems, how we can scale the rollout and the crucial components we need to maintain a global scale, at global scale, and to make sense of such architectures. I'm very, very happy that you're all here and very excited for what this conference will bring in the next few steps in our path towards implementing fair digital objects. I would like to take some time to discuss some of the objectives of the conference together with two people that I very much respect and I value their collaboration and friendship. So I would like to invite on stage Peter Wittenburg. Peter, the co-founder of the FDO Forum, co-chair of its executive board, and the person responsible or co-responsible for the conference program. And of course, Barend Mons. Barend, president of Co-Data, scientific director of GoFair, professor here next door at the Leiden University, and co-chair also of the conference steering committee. Peter, Barend, thank you very much for being on stage. I have prepared some questions which you have no idea about.
Yeah.
So, Peter, I would like to ask you, together with George Strone, of course, you have been the instigators and the driving force of the FDO Forum. You have been driving also the conference program, as I said before, together with Larry Lanham and Paolo Budroni. What can people expect from the program? What are the key topics that we're going to touch upon, the key themes, and why is this important, you think?
Yeah, so I made some scribbles. Don't know exactly where to start. Well, you mentioned the collaboration with George, which we all appreciate very much. So some time ago, George and myself, we wrote a paper, never published somewhere, but we wrote it. It was read by some people, where we spoke about the creolization. And only the people who are from the language world understand what creolization means. I think it's a good term. Set 10 people together, put them on an island, and they will immediately create a new language. That's what creolization means. So put 10 engineers, give them some money, some food, put them on an island, and they will create just another implementation. There's so much in technology out there. That's great. So we see all this heterogeneity We see all this serialization. And at a certain moment, and we started RDA, which is a great platform to talk. But George and myself, we had the feeling, well, it's not blaming anyone, but we had the feeling that RDA does not have this systemic approach, and doesn't have the trend to converge to something. So we started discussing this, and at a certain moment, we also met the FAIR people. Barend will say that. And we said, well, you know, we need to come to think about what is it what would bring data together as we brought computers together some decades ago. So some people know the slogan, the network is the computer. So how do we bring this, all the data together, seeing all the creolization, which is still ongoing, how to converge. And then we started the FDO forum. Now we have worked 2 years. We didn't know how it would come out, and we involved other people, like Barend, the discussion, of course. We didn't know really whether it comes out. Now, after 2 years, we are standing here. We see some results, but we have to prove them and get people together, talk with them about. We already started with what we achieved, what is missing. Tomorrow we have some sessions where people talk about concrete projects, and then we talk about policy aspects and so forth. So I, for myself, and I think the same holds for George, when we started this, we hoped that we have in 2 years something like this. We didn't know. To come really to conclusions about what we did and to start discussing the future.
Thank you. And Barend, obviously, you've been one of the co-authors of FAIR. You've been one of the strongest advocates since then, I think, globally. How do you see FDOs now? Well, how are we mature enough to have this discussion? Is it really the next step? Are we there, or are we just envisioning something that is out of reach at this point?
Well, we're certainly mature enough to have the discussion.
Okay.
That's another story. So let me say a few words about FAIR. You know, it was the acronym, we all know. It started down the road here at the Lawrence Center. George was there, many others. And we published a paper in 2016, and it sort of became a hype term because the funders started to acquire it and so on. And the last time I checked, we had well over 8,000 citations in a few years. But we always have the joke that among us, that minimally half of the people that cite the paper have apparently never read it. And there is so many misperceptions about it. People confuse it with the standard, which it is not. They confuse it with open, which it is not. They think it's a life sciences hobby, all these kind of things. And some people even think it doesn't have to do very much with machine actionability. While in the article we clearly stated that this is not one of the other efforts that make data more findable for people only. It was really machines first, and we also argued that if you involve machines, they can kiss very well, but they're stupid. You have to be much more precise in what you say in your data. And therefore, the machine, it will also be to the benefit of people and reproducibility of science in general. So I see that there is a lot of misperception still, but the most important thing to say is that FAIR is not a standard, it is a set of guidelines. And I think FAIR digital objects, and I would emphasize that although it's still here with digital objects as capital letters, which is logical, one of the many discussions we had about the declaration we discuss later is that it should be written with small letters, because it's not a brand name, it is an approach, as you said in your introduction, it is a way to create machine actionable units of information, which are the core of this web or Internet of Fair Data and Services. So I think it is the core implementation of the FAIR guidelines at the center of everything. Yeah. But we have to do it right, and we will hear a lot of implementations already. And
of course, we're coming into this conference as a follow-up also of another meeting, the Convergence Symposium from CoData and GoFair. Can you bring some of this, with the results of the discussions that you had over the last couple of days in the next 1 minute?
Now, I think we had a meeting of the GoFair directors, several workshops, and this morning Oscar, the Open Science Cloud Executive Roundtable with the leaders of most of the regional open science clouds, from Africa to China to the EOSC and so on. And then also the 4 international organizations, RDA, GoFair, CoData, and WDS. And there was a remarkable consensus that, okay, we still don't know exactly how to do this. There will be a lot of work, but this is the way to go. So the convergence that Peter was talking about after the realization phase, I think FDOs, as a concept, not a technology, we can achieve it in many different ways maybe, they will become a very important convergence driver, I think.
Perfect. Thank you. And I guess, Peter, my next question to you is follow-up to Barend, in the sense that we had a couple of sessions before the opening talking about the nitty-gritty details, basically, of FDOs. And it is very obvious that we will need that framework of operation and implementation. We will need this if we want to see en masse implementations and rollout of FDOs globally. Where do we stand in that? Where are we in that process, really?
Well, at the very beginning, I would say, so I think we understand now the concept, to follow your words, and the concept of FDOs. We have an understanding. But as you said, the most important point is, of course, convincing people after convincing ourselves, which we have done so far, I would say. And that's a hard job. I mean, we see all these there's so many technologies out there. So it sounds a bit technical, although I agree with you that the most difficult problems are the social problems. But there are so many technologies out there. There's so much funding out there now, at Europe at least. So think of Germany, think of European Commission. So people just go and produce something which is good, some good people. So how to bring these people again back to something which is where we think it's convergence. Conversion is a way to convergence. This is a hard job. This is a hard job. And what we miss is so much. Let me turn to technology. So the social aspects are primary, but let me turn to technology. What we certainly miss is we have some implementation islands. We miss a lighthouse project where we bring these islands together. And we just heard, again, some notes about possible German funds really for the core of the FDO. Wherever that happens, if in Netherlands, US, or Germany, it doesn't really matter. We need some core fund for a lighthouse project to bring these islands together. Since finally we have to convince people, as I think Rainer said before, and we need to come from different areas. So we need to understand the basis, have code there which is running, tested, but we also need to have applications which are using this. So it's a huge job ahead of us.
Barend, when we started this idea of having the conference, from the beginning we said that we wanted something that will mark the time, the point in time, and that we will be able to capitalize later on. And we said that what we want to see is also some kind of a document. We call that the Leiden Declaration. We're in Leiden, City of Science, for 2022. So we said it's a great opportunity to call that the Leiden Declaration. Can you tell a few things about that?
Yes. We have been working on that now for months with a growing group of people, a core group, to get to a declaration which is understandable for people to sign. That doesn't mean that the tech nerds, have all their specs out there, because that's not possible. So I call this the stupid biology version, because I'm a biologist by training.
We are in a biology organization.
I know, but this is how my tech people call it. Oh, that's the stupid biology version. So how most people, even biologists, can understand it. So we have a list of things that we try to make shorter and shorter. Blaise Pascal said, if I would have more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. So getting things to the absolute core is much more difficult. I can easily write pages and pages and talk for a long time, but getting this right was quite a challenge. We opened it up some time ago on the web, and 50 or so people have already pre-signed. Mm-hmm. But what we really believe is that if people sign at this high level and say, okay, this is a good idea, we still don't know exactly how to do it, but we'll try it. And this morning in the Oscar meeting, we said, okay, there is a commitment to action. We will not sign that yet, because everybody has to go back to their constituency and so on. say we will try this out for next year. We commit to come together again in a year from now and evaluate where the hurdles were, and maybe even leave open the possibility that we had it all wrong. You know, who knows?
Who knows?
It's a pretty important central thing that we have to get right, like TCP/IP versus other approaches. So I think that is what the declaration is about. We got, even this morning, but also online, up to Bob Kahn and people to make small changes. Don't call it internet, but web. Don't call it science, because then you, in some cultures, exclude social sciences and humanities, so we make it research. So there is no major changes over the last months, actually. So I think we are ready to sign this thing for those who can do it right now on Friday. And then don't think that's the last time. I mean, it will just be open there, and people can just sign up later and say, I'm part of this community that wants to try it. That's don't make it too heavy.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to thank you both. Thank you very much. We're 2 minutes ahead. That's what the clock says. I couldn't be happier and more honored to kick off the next part of this opening plenary. We have two amazing keynote speakers, and it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce the next keynote speaker, Robert Kahn. I think there is very few people in this room that probably don't know who Bob is, but I will try to summarize and introduce him. So, Bob is the co-inventor of the TCP-IP protocol and responsible for originating the US Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA's Internet Program, recipient of numerous distinctions, including the 1997 National Medal of Technology for founding and developing the Internet, together, of course, with his colleague, Vincent Cerf. In 2004, a Turing Award from the Association of Computing Machinery, the Nobel Prize of Computer Science, known as 2004 Presidential Medal of Freedom, and 2013 Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering. In 1986, Bob founded and remains the chair and CEO of the Corporation for National Research Initiatives, known to many of us as CNRI, providing technical leadership and funds for research and development of emerging information infrastructure components, such as the digital object identifiers. We have the pleasure to have Bob with us remotely, and oh, there he is. Hi, Bob. It's a great pleasure to have you. I don't know if you can hear us. That's fantastic. Well, we're looking.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, we can. We're looking forward to your speech. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm actually delighted to have been asked to give this keynote address at what I understand is the very first international conference on fair digital objects. My congratulations on having made this inaugural event happen. It marks a certain degree of progress in shaping the social processes that in many ways are as important or even more important than the technical issues you have come together to discuss in the past. The world will surely be the beneficiary of your overall efforts. So I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today, but it just wasn't possible for me at this time. But fortunately, we have the internet. Over my career, I've been involved in many related efforts, from the founding of the Dana Foundation almost 10 years ago to help evolve the digital object architecture and to oversee the operation of the Global Handle Registry, which forms the root of its identifier system, known as the Handle System. To the internet before that, I hardly need to tell you that a fundamental connection exists between fair digital objects, the subject of this conference, and digital objects more generally, and it's important to leverage both for the common good. So I want to begin by noting the importance of the work you are doing from the very start, the importance of the internet for managing information in digital form was understood, but little was done in the very early days to advance the concept. Although the internet greatly simplified the process of reliably transporting bits from one computer to another, no matter what kind of computer or where they may be located, making use of the digital information was mainly a matter of fingers manipulating keyboards and eyeballs looking at screens in real time. And to this very day, this is still largely the paradigm in use. The digital object architecture, or DOA as I call it, was originally created by CNRI as an infrastructural evolution of the internet. And in many ways, it underlies all of your efforts. And I applaud the progress that you have been making. The notion of managing information in digital form with computers has been a topic of interest for more than a half a century. And the notion of metadata has been around for decades. But what is relatively new is the notion of digital objects as a way of structuring such digital information and the use of associated unique identifiers in their management. If a digital object were to arrive at a given computer unannounced, and assuming the computer had sufficient storage to accept and store it, what else would it have to know about the digital object in order to process it? Obviously, the same kinds of questions would arise, even with fingers on keyboards, but without the necessary metadata to enable its interpretation, there would be no realistic possibility of automating the processing. When I first began working on computer networking, I was in my late 20s. I had a relatively unique background, having worked at Bell Laboratories in a group responsible for managing and evolving the architecture of the Bell telephone system in the United States, and also by having taught communications at MIT. I had to learn about computers along the way, but one of the things that I learned was that architecting infrastructure is basically a subtractive process. Unlike painting, where you keep adding colors, in the architecture world, you keep subtracting things. Every time you encounter a function or a feature that's not absolutely essential for use of the infrastructure itself, just remove it. This is especially important for complex systems such as computer networks and the internet in particular. The electrical infrastructure doesn't require a user to read an instructional manual before being able to use a power plug or to deliver electricity from the power plug to an electrical device, although the use of the device itself may require a user manual. Well, that was the approach I took to the design of ARPANET and then to the internet when both were DARPA-sponsored research projects. Years ago, we all knew that networks would eventually support all kinds of applications, but we had little inkling as to what they might be. And since then, it has been amazing to see all the innovations that have come from the research and development community around the world. Many decades ago, along with my colleague, Vincent Cerf, in addition to developing the protocols that enabled the internet, we took the initiative to set up the social structures that have sustained it and helped it to evolve to the present. Examples are the Internet Configuration Control Board, or ICCB, which led to the formation of the IAB, the IETF, and eventually the Internet Society. A particular note here is the reliance on these social structures to deal with the evolution of protocol specifications, to encourage dialogue and exchange of ideas, and to oversee critical operational aspects of the internet that are best kept separate from commercial interests. And I expect your efforts, along with those of the Donna Foundation, will play an important role in that regard going forward. I hope a close cooperation can develop over the years between these organizations. But before proceeding further, I want to make one comment about security. We all know how important communication security is, but protecting information stored in repositories is important as well, as is its use in providing identity management. Fortunately, identity management can be represented and processed, the information about it, in digital object form, and thus can be secured to the same extent that other kinds of digital objects can be secured. Providing for security is a challenge that goes well beyond technology, though. We have been fortunate to be able to take advantage of public key technology to date as an integral feature of the DOA, although even that may be obsoleted by other more advanced methods in the future. I'm going to leave my remarks about security to that and instead focus the rest of my talk today on observations about the DOA, which, along with the internet, provides the foundation for the FAIR digital object efforts. Along with many of you, I participated in the initial meetings of the newly formed Research Data Alliance, during which time early discussions of the digital object architecture took place. The DOA resulted from DARPA research support from that same office that first supported the internet and computer networking more generally. I don't plan to get into details about either the internet or the DOA today, but I would like to make a brief comment about the latter. The digital object architecture was introduced as a way to structure information represented in digital form and to associate it with it a unique persistent identifier, so as to make the digital information locatable based on resolving its identifier, potentially processable by computer given its defined structure, accessible by means of different protocols, of which the Digital Object Interface Protocol, known as DOIP, is perhaps the most important architecturally, since it enables interoperability of different types of information systems based on the exchange of identifiers. This is scalable over time, and thus enables the automation of information sharing between different systems. There is no combination of those terms that leads to a nice workable acronym such as FAIR. But in any event, the DOI specifically envisioned, although it did not define or attempt to define, three of the areas that the FDO effort is spelling out in much more detail. The ability to process digital objects depends critically on the availability of relevant metadata, one type of which is type information itself, which can also be represented as digital objects. Progress on these fronts was expected to result from various social processes to be implemented with the help of different communities, and thus is not specified in detail in the digital object architecture. So in that sense, the FDO forum is an example, an excellent example actually, of a helpful community activity. We knew that identifiers would play an important role in almost any information system in the future, and also that repositories would be needed to store digital objects and then to enable them to be accessed. So we decided to specify those aspects and produce research implementations which were exceptionally reliable and robust, and as a result, they have remained in use ever since we started them back in the 1990s with significant enhancements along the way. In some ways, these contributions represent striking similarities to how the internet evolved from its research beginnings, and in many ways, it is still a work in progress. This is where the Dana Foundation comes into play. By design, it has a very limited role in the managing of the evolution of the basic digital object architecture. And in this context, Dana is prepared to work with organizations such as the FDO Forum in evolving new architectural concepts and design choices. The Dana Foundation provides a home for basic concepts, and I emphasize basic, or approaches that involve the digital object architecture. So to that extent, a research affiliation between the FDO Forum and the Dana Foundation would make good sense. We can all benefit from a single, coherent, scalable, and integrated identifier resolution system. The Dana Foundation oversees such capability, and its management and operation is highly decentralized. Its main operational role of the Dana Foundation is to oversee the operation of the Global Handle Registry, which manages prefixes. CNRI began this effort almost 3 decades ago to provide a tangible capability for global use, and we ultimately transferred that responsibility to the Dana Foundation once it was formed. 2 European groups are currently involved in its management and operation, namely GWDG, located in Göttingen, Germany, and the International DOI Foundation, which itself is decentralized, but whose managing agent is nominally based in the Netherlands. The challenge facing the FDO Forum participants, and indeed all of us, reminds me of the original Internet challenge. Given many different networks with their own individual characteristics and attached computers, how can we create an integrated digital communications environment whereby specifying only a single identifier per computer, now known as an IP address, it would be possible to quickly and reliably communicate relatively small packets from one computer to another. The TCP-IP protocol provided such a solution when used in conjunction with routers, which we called gateways back then. And they have formed the basis of the internet ever since. So instead of multiple networks and computers, consider now that we have a world consisting of multiple information systems, all of which make use of digital objects, resolvable identifiers, and repositories that use one or more standard interface protocol, but which otherwise have their own individual characteristics and are thus intrinsically incompatible at some level. How would a user or even a user system navigate among these various incompatible systems, even if one or more of them happen to agree on FAIR principles, but whose implementations do not necessarily work together? Taking FAIR digital objects as an example, if a user relies on its chosen information system, say FAIR system number 1, and the user needs to access information on a different system, say FAIR system number 2, the user might know how to navigate both systems sequentially, and perhaps can do so, but this would not substitute for automating the process of interoperability, which would be far more efficient for the user. Enabling interoperability via automated processes is thus a higher desirable long-term goal for all of us. The Digital Object Interface Protocol enables interoperability across system interfaces and enables the communication of commands via the use of identifiers and even users by identifiers. But it does not guarantee that the commands are necessarily implemented in software at the point of reception. For the earlier use of computer networks, certain functions were simplified by limiting the tasks to be carried out on certain ports or sockets so that the arriving information would be understood in advance to be structured accordingly, and a receiving program would thus know how to process it. Remote login was handled on one port, email on another, and so forth. But thereafter, it began to require fingers on keyboards. Vint and I had hoped to move beyond that when we introduced in the late 1980s the notion of what we called NoBot programs, or simply NoBots, as mobile programs that could carry out a user's stated requests that involved multiple information systems and then carrying back the results. But apart from some initial deployments, this capability wasn't disseminated widely back then for several reasons. One was that the then emergence of viruses, which made almost everyone overly concerned about accepting programs from unknown users to run on their computers, regardless of whether or not there were good technical solutions to their concerns. Another reason is identical to what I posed above. Without a means of understanding how to enable interoperability between different information systems at every required level, where detailed procedures needed to be invoked, failure to achieve a general purpose solution was foreseeable. If we can solve the problem of interoperability posed above, we have a shot at realizing the full potential of mobile programs as well. I hope the FDO forum can help with this problem as well. But even if we forego the notion of mobility, as I just described, we still need to solve the problem of dealing with different information systems. We have some of the pieces in hand, including the DOIP as a general interfacing protocol, but we need more. When a digital object arrives at a computer, unless the only requirement is to store the bits and allow for later access, the computer needs to be able to determine what the DO consists of in order to process it. Just knowing it's a set of bits is just not sufficient. For example, if it were to consist of sensor data, the digital object might contain an identifier that would lead to a description of the sensor or even the identity of the location where the data was taken, if it was taken at one location. But the DO would need to be parsed to determine the individual sensor readings, as well as the time of each reading, if more than one. Knowing about types is therefore critical to the understanding of the nature of the bits in a digital object at a finer level of granularity. And this is something the FDO Forum and the Data Foundation might be able to work on together. And if so, we will have reached a stage where the software in a user's computer can interact with software in other systems to carry out specified queries and tasks, well-specified queries and tasks on their behalf without the user's direct intervention. So this represents a challenge for future generations of researchers interested in information management. Imagine a well-formed query posed to one's home system, one that would be understood by that system, and which system can automatically handle the interactions with the relevant other systems on behalf of the user. Those other systems' metadata will need to be interpreted in real time to enable that other system's digital objects to be understood, which in turn will require understanding of the associated type information, which is used in structuring digital objects and which hopefully has a standard global representation, and then return to the user what it was understood was being requested. Much work has been done on query languages that are well specified, and those efforts may come in handy here, as may some of the newer AI techniques. But no matter what progress we make, the response to a query that starts with a clause or a phrase and ends with a seemingly clear request depends entirely on the semantics of the predicate. One need look no further than the sonnet of Elizabeth Barrett Browning that starts, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways," to see the difficulty of processing philosophical queries. So I think I'll end my remarks here. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to share my views with you on these important topics. And I look forward to not only learning about your progress in addressing these and other important issues facing the community in the future, and wish you all the best in your future endeavors, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Bob, for this very insightful talk. I'm sure there are plenty of people that they have the urge to ask a question to Bob. So I will look around the room And whilst I'm doing that, I would like to bring up a question to you, if that's okay. You very nicely talked about this abstractive way through which we build infrastructure and architectures. And you also talked about the challenges that we have ahead of us as the FDO forum. I would argue that, as you talked about this abstractive way of building architectures, similarly, when we strategize, we need to look at the things that we should not be doing, what we leave out, so that we can focus on what is important. So I would like to ask you, looking ahead in the next steps of the FDO forum, what are those things that we shouldn't be doing?
Well, I would start by saying, since we're trying to represent the most basic stuff in the Donor Foundation, and since many other groups, or at least a few other groups around the world, may try and replicate the kinds of efforts you're undertaking, but do it in different ways, don't try and replicate what the Donor Foundation is doing, for starters, but work with the Donor Foundation so you can leverage what it does in a general purpose way to your benefit and everyone's benefit. That would be number one. Number two, I would say don't try to pick on specific end user applications to focus on in your work, but keep your efforts more generic and general purpose, even though you have some specific things to focus on. And keep in mind, the things you're focusing on are things we chose not to focus on, even though we knew they might be important, because we knew different parties might have different ways of thinking about those problems. And therefore, we didn't want what we did to be rejected because we picked a specific approach that was not accessible or meaningful or acceptable to everyone. I certainly would tread very carefully on issues of data privacy. There are laws springing up all over. In Europe is probably more central to that than any other place, that some things that seem relatively easy to do end up stepping on privacy-related matters. So I would be very careful to steer clear of issues in your work that that get in the way of those privacy, or the privacy laws will challenge. I would also be very careful about getting too deep into security matters, because even though many people think providing security is largely a technical matter, in reality, it's more of a political and social matter than anything else. The reason we didn't have really good security in even the ARPANET in the early days, and I was responsible for trying to make that happen, was that there was an essential conflict between the need of the private sector for security in everything it did and the need of federal governments for not only law enforcement, but national security. Those two forces are tugging at each other even today, so I'd be careful of that. The other thing I would be very aware of is that whatever you do, if you do it well, it may be possible for other parties around the world who may be inclined to want to either duplicate or replace what you do to actually accept what you do. And so I would strongly urge you to do it in a way that may make it accessible to a larger community. And that's another area where the Donor Foundation may be a helpful partner in the process of doing that. The Donor Foundation will likely proceed down a few paths that are at its level of basic infrastructure, and we want to engage you with that as well. But we're not going to do everything, and probably you shouldn't do everything either, even if you could. So maybe I'll just stop there and take some more questions if you have them.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to look around the room if there is anyone Barend? I don't see anyone else.
Okay, Bob, I don't think you can see us, but I remember discussing this with you before, years ago with George. I think you stopped when you were talking about digital objects at the reusability. You said part of the other elements of the acronym FAIR are actually there, of course. Could you elaborate a little bit on one more issue that relates to the GDPR or the privacy issues that is now a big issue in the internet as well? That I always say, again, this is a stupid biology version, that a machine should know what is this, the type, what can I do with it technically, but the very important question is, what am I allowed to do with this? Can I reuse this for the purpose at hand? So I think that's one of the reasons why the FDO said that the metadata, very important, you emphasize that, should be separated from the data or the resource it points to, because it might be that the metadata tells the machine, you're not allowed to see the data. So could you say a little more about the extra value of metadata and how they relate to the resource or the object itself?
Well, there are two aspects of reusability. You pointed to one of them. It's actually an important one. But I had always envisioned that the creator of a digital object could specify and make available somehow. Could be in the digital object itself, but as you point out, might be more appropriate in the metadata to spell out what is possible. Like it may be, for example, possible for anybody to access a digital object if you pay for it. And it'd have to spell out what the charges might be. I'd like to know about that before I even go down the path to know whether it's free or not. Another thing you could do is say something about what usage you can make of it. I'm fortunate to be married to a copyright lawyer who is an expert in these areas. So, we've gone through many of the possible areas that you could spell out, and you'd need to have a way of spelling it out. And there are people who have focused on this as, business issues, as a business matter in one way, shape, or form. So I think that's all manageable and that's all doable, and you could figure out a way that you're comfortable doing with it, or maybe there's a general way that everybody should do it, in which case the Donna Foundation might get involved to help propagate that. But the more difficult question to me is understanding what you can reuse a digital object for. And there's no way that the creator of it is going to understand every possible application of it that somebody else might want. So that poses a real challenge. How do you even represent in some unique way that can be understood by a computer or even a person what the purpose of something is that doesn't require a whole research project to figure out what to do with it? Reusability is not a very effective thing if it takes months or years in order to figure out how to reuse it. So in order to be able to reuse it in real time, the computer is going to have to be able to understand, for a new problem, is this older creation in digital object form relevant to it? And that's a research challenge for all of you. I commend you for it. If you can make progress on that, we'll all benefit from it.
Thank you very, very much. I cannot say no to George, so although we're running low in time, but yeah, George.
Thank you, Rob, for that normally inspiring speech. Glad to hear another one. I know that in recent times you've been studying the blockchain technology. I wonder if you could comment on its relevance to our activities going forward.
Okay, well, that's right. Thank you for that question. I don't know if it's a hardball question or a softball one, but let me say that within the context of the digital object architecture, it has the ability to link blocks together. So any organization or group can get together and link together their systems to build a chain of blocks. And they can do it with enough security that they can feel comfortable. Whether you want to have it in a form that can never be replaced, that's a different issue. It's tough to imagine keeping things around in perpetuity. But let me also say that this is an area that I was thinking about, along with my wife, for many years. We wrote a paper back in 2001. Actually had a patent application we're going to make available to the public. And the paper was entitled Representing Value as Digital Objects. And we pointed out, because almost everybody who had been using the digital object architecture focused it on material that was subject to copyright or other rights, that it was applicable in a wider interest. It was applicable to things in which people had interest or in which there was value. So what might be of interest? It might be a contract of some sort that you had an interest in, or a piece of something that wasn't really subject to copyright. On the other hand, value, we anticipated the notion of digital currency. In fact, it was very clear in the patent application that we filed, which I'm happy to share with everyone, because we decided not to proceed with it because the U.S. Patent Office basically said the digital object architecture already had equivalent of a patent in that notion, focused on a use case that involved a federal government minting money, in the case of the U.S. through the Federal Reserve System. That paper was published by the University of Colorado's Law Journal. I'd be happy to give a reference to it to any of the organizers and share it with you. But I would also say you can find on the internet, as a result of my giving talks at several of the early blockchain conferences, remarks that basically said to the attendees who were very avid about blockchain that you need to understand the context in which blockchain has emerged. It's not as if blocks are brand new items. We dealt with the chaining of blocks back in the space age, going back to probably the 50s with, linking communications to deep space. We dealt with it in linking programs together in various ways, and the digital object architecture allowed for one digital object to put in an identifier that would link to another digital object. And so I was trying to put that all in context that, they have one way of dealing with things that people might find interesting simply because of their means of getting consensus and the like, but that there are other ways. And in fact, within the handle system, which is a part of this identifier resolution system that the Donor Foundation is administering, there are multiple MPA services around the globe. I mentioned two of them in my earlier remarks, but there are something like 8 or 10 of them that have been organizations that have been credentialed around the globe. They all manage these global registry services through a kind of a blockchain. That's a very efficient form that we created ourselves. So you could go to any one of these services and it should have exactly the same kind of data that any of the other services have, just based on the way it's all securely exchanged between those parties. So there are various ways to deal with this. And it reminds me very much of the early days in which people say, well, the first message on the ARPANET was sent on such and such a date, when in fact, if you looked at the history, there were probably dozens of examples of messages being sent from one place to another, either for research purposes or the like before that. So, I'm very well aware of the interest in blockchain, and for some people it appears to be a brand new notion. To my way of thinking, it's not only not a brand new notion, but it's one of many ways to try and build a kind of a secure way of managing information over the long haul, where there's some guarantees that, what you put in we'll have some staying power. We can spend a lot more time on this one subject, but thank you for the question, George.
Bob, it has been a huge pleasure having you with us. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for all the guidance and support that you give also to the forum. Please join me in thanking Bob once more. Thank you very much. We move on to an equally exciting, quite different, but I think very complementary, actually, keynote. I would like to introduce to you Julia Janssen. Julia is an Amsterdam-based artist, designer, and public speaker. Through her art, she researches the influence of digitization on our physical world. Julia's recent work includes award-winning art projects such as Bank of Online Humanity, 0.0146 seconds, or Why I Like Green, creating awareness of the potential implications of the developments such as targeted advertisements and AI on individual safety, fairness, autonomy, freedom, and promoting data sovereignty for a safer, fairer, more transparent, more sustainable, and democratic internet. She's the host of the Hyperclick podcast about the future of data. Please join me in welcoming Julia on stage.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for having me today as our final speaker. It probably happens to all of you, even a couple of times a day. You want to use an application or you want to open a website. But then it happens, click here to continue. I want a well-functioning website. Give me the best experience. I've read the terms and give my consent. OK, agree, yes, and got it. Well, behind these very poetically described buttons, we have no clue what's actually in there. There are endless tons of privacy policies and data policies, which we of course never read. The list is literally endless, and we tend to accept about 1,700 of these buttons every year. But in my research into the mechanics of these systems, I found out that one click on a button like this might have more than one destination. And what that means that one click on accept buttons can accept hundreds of privacy policies at the same time. This is called a trusted third-party hosting network. It's quite a technical term. And in my research into the Daily Mail, I don't know why, but I just found it, I found that one click there on Got It accepted 835 privacy policies all at once. All companies that can monitor you, surveil you, understand whatever you want to do on that website with just your informed consent, supposedly. As an artist, I try to make these very obscure, very opaque patterns more visible, and I try to make them more alive and make them more relatable for people. So here you see a book with all those 835 privacy policies collected. But that wasn't enough for me. It was like I was doing exhibitions and people were referring to it as an object. It was like, well, it's not merely an object, it's a collection of contracts that we all blindlessly agree to. So I started to make a pop-up radio studio to read from the book out loud. I did the first page myself, as you see here, but after some quick calculations, I noted that it might take up to hundreds of hours to actually read the whole lot, let alone understand it, because it's quite dry legal terms. So after reading the first page myself, I started to invite people in my space, in my pop-up radio studio. And I invite people to read out loud from this book for 12 minutes, up until it's all recorded and documented into an artwork called 0.0146 seconds, because that's actually the time in which you click. And that will result in up to hundreds of hours of reading privacy policies out loud. So this is a way that I try to make this very dry legal topics more relatable, more accessible for people, but also make them part of it. It's not merely saying, well, this is wrong with the internet, because nobody really cares. They say they care, nobody really cares. But making them part of a movement, making them part of an experience as well, I find very important into making new steps in facing the challenges of the internet. So here you see a lot of different exhibitions I did. And as an artist, I try to, as already mentioned, research the impact of digitalization on our society. And as an artist, I try to dedicate my practice to these questions, like how do we deal with fairness, democracy, autonomy, and all these kind of core values that we find so normal in our physical lives. How to address these questions into our digital lives as well. Or as you very well described it in the event, turning the internet into a meaningful data space. I think it's a very good question and a very good statement to add here. So after researching these whole infrastructures of collecting people's data by making privacy policies as opaque as possible, I was also interested in what actually data they are observing from us. What are they collecting and who is collecting that, with what incentive and what intention, and where is that data going to? So I started a new project. And this project started with doing a lot of data requests, because it's a really nice way of getting a lot of data from a lot of companies. And I was particularly interested in the ones from bigger corporations, because they not only show you the raw data, but they also sometimes show you profile data. So here you can see the representation of me by Meta, because they tied 106 interests to me. I don't know why. There are a lot of random words on here, but also very specific words, like the American Mathematical Society, creativity, graphic design, trades, iPhone. I always pick different ones, it's very nice. Vegan nutrition, but also I was thinking, looking at this list, why does this represent me? And can I find the data that actually is leaning towards these kind of interest tags? And I was specifically interested in the color green. And now I feel obviously aware that I'm wearing a green pen, so that's great. So I was interested in the color green. I was thinking, does everybody here get a color assigned to them? You know, is everybody, I don't know, grabbed into a color, or is that only me? Why do I like green? Do I like green? Do I like green because they want me to like green? All these kind of, very layered philosophical questions kind of occurred from seeing that very specifically said color green. So I started the project, Why I Like Green. I wanted to find the data that tells this algorithm that I like green. And I started with the data request, but also kind of mapping this whole infrastructure of how Meta actually collects information, because they are a master at collecting data beyond the platform itself. So I started with Facebook, obviously. When you do a data request, you get a lot of folders, and in that folders, more folders, and then a lot of data, like your rejected friend requests, your likes, the events that you went to, the events that you didn't went to, or the event pages that you saw. Like all these kind of things. It's quite an extraordinary world. Everybody should do a data request every now and then. So from that folder selection, I chose one folder, the event data. And from that event data, I chose one event and then looked at others who also went to that event. So there you can see kind of the way that I try to structure this, because I need to narrow it down, otherwise you will have endless piles of data. But then you can also see that Meta created access to the cookies active on the devices that you use Facebook with. So my MacBook, my iPhone, and I haven't used Facebook in years. But still, because for research reasons, of course, I have the app on my phone, and they can still extract a lot of data from that. They can also see what kind of applications I use. When do I open them, and how do I interact with them? It's very detailed information about a person. But the most interesting part is that they kind of created 3 types of backdoors into a whole new universe of data. They bought up companies, Instagram, Oculus, well, all these kind of companies who are now part of the Facebook family. But they also offer something called authentication by Facebook. they present it very like server-centric, like, oh, when you make a new account, you don't have to, go to all these kind of forms and everything. Just sign up with your Facebook account because that's really easy. Well, it's a very nice way for them to collect more data about you. They also place pixels. It's kind of a cookie technology they invented. And you don't have to do anything for it. You don't even have to log in. They just place a pixel, and they can extract all user data into their network as well. So again, I made this kind of layered structure, the Instagram folders, the scene post and content, and others who liked one of the posts that I saw. From the authentication, I chose Spotify folders, the streaming history, the scene, the songs and podcasts that I listen to, and the personalized mixes, so mixes that are already based on my search history. And then it becomes quite intimate, because for the pixels, I placed a dating application that I used mainly during COVID, I have to say. And then I found out by this request that the conversations on these applications are not encrypted. So they could literally see in my conversations, and also Meta, because of this pixel, could read into my conversations. Interesting detail there. With this request, they only show your part of a conversation because of privacy reasons. Great. So, and then to sum it all up, there were kind of the people who liked me without me liking them back, as the final part of this whole grid. So there had to be some data, some information in this whole kind of data universe of me liking green, or all these other things that were on there. So I had this kind of research, I had this schedule, but then I had to find a way to make this more visible. So I bought this very cute robot, and I called her Mac. And with her, I wrote 3,500 ping pong balls, approximately, with my personal data, as in the structure I just shown. And we spent hours together. It's a very labor-intensive procedure. But it was, again, a way to volumize the data, to give it some existence, and to also get it out of this digital context, and to actually start experimenting with it. So you can see, we had a lot of fun together. And after a while, I ended up with, so many ping pong balls. And then I was thinking, okay, I need a new way to exhibit it. I need to go one step further. So I tried to start with this data set and then make a whole experience about the decision-making process of algorithms, because that starts with collection of data and then it goes into a lot of steps. I was wondering, can I ask all these questions like, do I like green because of, and what does it mean, and how does it influence my life, into a new installation? So, dear data, how do you decide my future? And that's an interactive installation about the decision-making process of an algorithms, and why the process is not neutral, because that's a very important point that I will address a little later. So we detect 4 phases. I mean, if we go more in detail, it's obviously more, but to kind of have some kind of foundations for it, we see the collection, categorization, classification, and the profiling. So to start with the collection, well, we had this immense data set of ping pong balls, and I find a way to structure them and to make that kind of infographic visible in a room, visible in a whole installation. So I worked together with a steel engineer to build this work from that. So the whole kind of the position of the balls in the grid kind of refers to the way that they're collecting the data, the origin of the data, and what kind of source the data is from. And people could actually touch this. So I made this site-specifically for Lowlands, one of the biggest music festivals here in the Netherlands. And now we're on a tour, so we're traveling around with it. And it's really nice because it felt very intimate that people was actually touching this data. Felt like they were, coming very close to whom I am. And people were actually laying on the ground and try to see as much about me as possible, which was nice, also quite intimidating sometimes. People will approach me and say like, wow, why do you want a turtle? And I was like, I don't know, did I say that? I was like, yeah, that's been one of your conversation. You were mentioning a turtle. And I was like, oh, but that's actually green. So there might be an answer in there. So okay, the next part of the installation is the categorization of data. And I think when we all kind of heard about AI for the first time, it felt like this was this almost magical creature that is now there, all-knowing, like an oracle, you know? But to demystify that, there are so many people around the world actually training these systems. We are training these systems by reCAPTCHA, for example, saying to Google, this is a palm tree and this is a roundabout. So to get people confronted with the way that we are actually the ones that are training these systems, and that we as people, as humans, are not neutral, that was something that I wanted to confront people in a kind of a light and fun way with it. So I created a game in which they were training one of the data sets in the installation by categorizing it as some kind of content moderation. And the first rule in content moderation occurred around 2006 by Facebook as well, was the no nipple policy. Because if it was a female nipple, it was not allowed on the platform. But I found this very randomly in the set. It's quite interesting because, you know, it are definitely female breast, but it's also a statue. So we can say like, well, you have a couple of seconds. Is this a nipple or is it not a nipple? Well, is this the morning or is it the evening? Well, depending on your kind of bad habits, probably. But how does that work for concepts like light or dark? How do we categorize this? And what does that mean? Do we call this light or do we call this dark? Do we call this feminine or masculine? And what is the definition of masculine and feminine? And if we train our technology that this is masculine and this is not, what does that mean for future generations? What does that mean for our own cultural understanding of masculine and feminine? We have to be aware of that we are training these systems and that we come from our old cultural or economical or political bias. So I asked these questions also first in a zoomed-in version and then in a zoomed-out version. And we also measured if these answers were differently the first time or the more kind of broader perspective. So that's for the categorization part. Oh no, I have a video of, but it's not doing anything. Well, just an example of how they were working. So it kind of bounces like a ping pong ball and you have to swipe it in a couple of seconds. So follow up on the categorization part is the classification of the data. And I can best describe that as, like, if we want to use an algorithm, we set a certain definition of success. You want to, you know, get something from that. But if we set a definition of success, we also intend something with that. So for example, if you want to hire a person for a job, you will probably say, give me the smartest person for this job. But we all have a different idea of what smart is. That might be a certain degree, that might be from a certain university. It might also be a certain IQ or a certain look. We all have this feeling of what we think that smart should contain. But we are all kind of coming from our own cultural, political, economical, whatsoever bias. So if we are not aware of that we're actually asking something and that we're staring towards a certain answer, then we might be in trouble. So I created this game again with the same data set, and 9 images were selected randomly, and they were asked, like, what is happy? What is sad? What is dirty? What is healthy? And if we train our system as healthy or dirty looks like this, what does that mean? You know, how does that shape the internet and how does that shape our digital landscape? What is normal? Does anybody have an answer to that? You know, it's not so easy to detect what is normal, but it's something that we're training our systems. And this is, I think, a very striking example. I filmed this accidentally. Yeah, it kind of shows that this person was answering that the white male is normal, that the black guy is threatening, and that the pretty girl is skinny. And I find that very sad to observe. But that is something that we make very determinative, very permanent in our technology when we train the systems without us knowing and being aware of our bias. And then after every game, people get feedback. So they will say like, well, your decisions are now part of our intelligence because we are all the ones creating this common intelligence. The final part is about profiling. And it's a video wall, and I actually start a conversation with my data, asking it what it actually means that it's been observing all these things about me, that it has been trained to detect all these things about me. They witnessed what I desired, they can observe a lot of things about me, but does it really know me? I want to understand. So what I'm asking here, you've locked me into prediction statistics, make me as predictable as possible to risk management, to consumer profiling, to all these kind of things to make the most money or make the most benefits out of it. But what is actually the intention of collecting all this data? Do they guide me to what I need? Or do they want to navigate me to what they want me to find? So I think it's very interesting to also ask these kind of incentives for using data and algorithms. What do they want to do with it? Why do they want me to like green and not pink or red or whatsoever? What is kind of the incentive of the algorithm, the data, and the installation? So I asked the people at Lowlands, but also still, do you know me in ways that I don't know myself, or don't you know me at all? After witnessing all my data, seeing all these kind of intimate details, intimate kind of data points about me, do you know me? And they had to answer that by taking a sticky, fake tattoo. So they can choose either between, I do know Julia, do you? Or I don't know Julia, do you? And it was a lot of fun, and it started also a lot of new conversation as well. So people were kind of talking on the festival, like, hey, I chose do know, and I chose didn't know. And what does it actually mean? It started conversations about what does knowing also means. So that was a lot of fun, and also a great experience, and I also took some with me. So if you're interested in having a nice tattoo, I have some very nice examples of where you can place them. And it was quite extraordinary to see like so many people walking around these festivals with my name and also starting conversations. So again, it's kind of a way to make it fun, accessible, to talk about these topics, and to make a movement. So to round up some very short takeaways for the Fair Digital Objects Forum, is there real informed consent? Is there voluntariness? Is there a fair choice? If we use an algorithm and if we use data, what is the source? What is collected and what is not collected? And how does that depict the results? Who is creating the AI and who is training it? Who is involved in the process? Is it a diverse team? All these kind of things are often not asked, and it's very important to ask. And also, what do you want to solve? What is the intention of using and collecting data and using an algorithm? Thank you so much for having me today.
If you want to stay. Wow, I knew that would be very relevant, but that's amazing. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much.
Do you like green?
You're not the first one to ask.
I know, but I have to ask it.
Yeah, I do, but I'm not sure if I favor it over other colors. So yeah, I do wear sometimes green. I also have many plans. I mean, there are some reasons why I like green, but I'm not sure if it's datafied in certain matters.
And after...
Well, I'm not sure if there's a direct line between that, but yeah.
And after manifesting all of that data into the physical world, do you think you know yourself better, actually?
Oh no, I was wearing the I don't know Julia tattoo for for the obvious reason of no. I think like these companies know so much about us, and they know parts that probably your best friend or your mom or whomever is not knowing about you. But I think people are more complex than just the data about us. I think also all these companies are collecting just a part of us. Like, for example, our identity is quite complex, and in our physical world, we also kind of switch between roles so rapidly. And on the digital world or in these platforms, you are just what the data or what the platform wants you to be. So at Netflix, they might think that I'm some 16-year-old girl, and maybe on Amazon they think that I'm a single mom. I don't know, you know. I don't know what they construct based on the data. I don't have a say in that, and I think it's very one-dimensional what they want to do with that.
I think what you said about, and I'm looking through the room to see if people would like to ask Julia, but no. One quick question, can I, Gwen? Okay. What I would like to mention is that I really enjoyed the fact that as you zoomed out and provided more context, actually people change their perspective, and I think that's exactly what we're looking with the fair digital objects as well, how we can provide more context around the things that we are putting out there in the digital realm. So I think that you made the point very well for us as well. So thank you very, very much, and yeah, good luck with the rest of your projects.
Thank you so much.
I had some final remarks, which I will throw away, and I will say to all of you, I hope that we will have 3 fantastic days. I think it's time for a well-deserved alcoholic or non-alcoholic beverage. And I would like to invite you all to join us for a reception. Thank you all very much, and thank you for being here.